Greetings once again, dear colleagues. We are very glad to see you today, that despite all the obstacles, you are here with us. Today we start the roundtable, which is called From Status to Prospects, Shaping the Legislative Agenda for Decentralization. I would like to remind you that this roundtable is one of the events organized in the cycle of the events of HOVERLA project, and I would like to remind you that before the 12th session of the Verkhovna Rada Parliament of Ukraine, in the framework of this project, we made a research on the legislative initiatives, and this roundtable has an objective to discuss the priorities and to discuss what was implemented and what we have to do in the future. So that is the name of our today's roundtable. I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Richard Rapier, Vice President of the USAID Project HOVERLA. Please.
Dear partners, colleagues, and friends, on behalf of USAID HOVERLA activity, I express our sincere gratitude to USAID for its valuable support in making this event possible. USAID is represented today here by Corey Johnston, so welcome, Corey. Today's roundtable underscores the importance of advancing decentralization reform and strengthening Ukraine's local governance institutions. Please allow me to also share a special thanks to MPs Vitaly Bezgin, to my left, Dimitro, where's Dimitro? Dimitro, also to my left, and Larissa Bilazar for their active contributions, as well as that of the Ministry of Communities and Territories Development. I and the HOVERLA team also extend our appreciation to the local, state, and military administration experts and local self-government experts, as well as all attendees for their commitment. This event, part of the Legislative Agenda Forum on Decentralization, focuses on legislative support for local governments in 2024 to 2025. It reviews progress on priority draft laws, building on the outcomes of the August Decentralization 2024 Legislative Agenda Forum. Legislative forums being organized with USAID HOVERLA's support since 2021 connect local governments with national policymakers in shaping the Verkhovna Rada's decentralization legislative agenda by conducting surveys of local government leadership before each Verkhovna Rada session. Take 2024 as a case in point. 2 forums prioritize 43 draft laws proposed by local governments. Of these, 6 laws were enacted and 18 others have made it onto the agenda at the Rada, a tangible testament to the power of dialogue and collaboration like this one today. As we assess the outcomes of the 12th Rada session, it's important to align efforts and define priorities, including updating the 2014 concept on decentralization reform. Stakeholder engagement will be essential, as highlighted in the recent reforms, Decentralization European Integration Forum in Bucha. Through dialogue platforms and engagement mechanisms, USAID HOVERLA will continue to advance decentralization reform, strengthen local government institutions, and foster an efficient legal framework to enhance their capacity. Together, our collective efforts will institutionalize Ukraine's local self-government system and empower communities. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to today's productive discussion.
Thank you, Richard.
Before I pass the microphone, I do not know how to say this in Ukrainian. Before I pass the the main role to Mr. Bessin, I would like you to check your files, and there you can find the tables. So the tables which show the dynamics of the adoption of the legislative acts regarding decentralization, and they are during the last 2023-2024. Also, beside that, I would like to say that we have Mr. Tkachuk with us. He is on the screen. Mr. Vitaly, I'm passing the floor to you. Please, the floor is yours. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. Thank you very much. Greetings. I've heard your words, and I understood that today I'm moderator. Sometimes it happens. And I think it would be correct if we say that today, on Monday of the last plenary week, we are talking about decentralization, and that is extremely relevant in December, and 2025 is going to be very difficult, both administrative and legally. But Ukraine has never considered that to be an obstacle in reform implementation. I think that Ukraine is a unique example which, despite the full-scale war, continues reforming, continues your integration. And we would like to thank our partners for supporting us in this, supporting this project today, for example, Project HOVERLA. Sincerely, thank you. And considering the fact that we are on the 11th year of decentralization reform, and on the other hand, that is the 11th year of the war with the Russian Federation, and it means that the war is not reshaping and not stopping the processes of rebuilding of the structure in Ukraine. So I will probably respond what we can see in the printed materials. I think that the last example, the infographics, which we can see in the files, it demonstrates that we have a progress. We do have it. Of course, when we're talking about your integration, it's a bit easier because the parliament is just voting, and when it comes to your integration, it is passing easier. But a few more things I would like to say from my side. I think that quite often nowadays we are more focused on the big conceptual things, your integration, for example, but sometimes we do forget about the things which are related to self-sufficiency when it comes to managing the territories. So if we require from the one hand as a state to increase the revenues in the state budgets and more transparency, I guess that as a state we have to assist in these kind of things. For example, to tell the limits, to help with inventorization of the land, and to implement the mechanisms and tool on the data exchange as a first stage. And I think that that is quite obvious. And as we as a state, we want consistent approach. We should not provoke lots of pricey documents and require Armadas to implement them as starting from the 1st of January 2025, when we understand that most of the Armadas will not have these documents, and we have to understand that the basics should be the strategy and not something regarding construction, and if we require from the local self-government competitive environment on the international stage when it comes to the donors fund. So maybe in this case we have to provide with proper salaries. And when it comes to the draft law 1154, the minimum wage can't be lower than the minimum salary. So I guess it's obvious for everyone, probably except for the Minister of Finance. That is something we have to fight for. And if we want to have the employees who work with the international affairs, so probably we have to promote 1284 and bring the money to the territories. And it's not odd to the European legislation. And therefore, we have to be talking about this, and I hope that today we have the people who are ready to speak about these topics. So I'm not going to take more time. I'm going to pass the floor to the mic. I'm going to pass the floor to Ms. Larissa Bilazir, because in this case we're talking about services, and I guess the first thing we have to understand is that if we want Harmadas to provide the services and to implement the law on the centers of the administrative services, the services should not be costing less than 1 hryvnia, and that is something we had to get focused on. So I'm passing the mic to Ms. Larissa Bilazir, who is one of the authors of the initiative administrative procedure, which became the law and which are marked in green on these infographics. The floor is yours. Greetings, dear colleagues. Good morning. So, in fact, I would like to say that this research and these conclusions and analytics, which shows us what was adopted, what wasn't adopted, what was adopted in the first reading, what is awaiting for the local self-government. All of these things, they will only enhance our state, and we have to be interested in these laws to be adopted. Believe me, our committee supported each draft law which we had to support, and of course when it comes to expertise, because we can see there are many other draft laws, that is the law on the personal income tax and also administration, management of the personal income tax. That is not the question of the committee I belong to, but it is more about it is expertise of Mr. Hetmantsev's committee, and the same thing we can see in the report of the Euro Commission on the expansion. So we had the research, and the research was conducted between the heads of Harmadas, and all of these things you can see in the report on the expansion from the Euro Commission. That is our roadmap milestone, which shows us that Euro integration and the opinion of Euro integration, our opinion, matches. And of course, we have lots of work here. There are obstacles, and we have to mark that the European Commission says that the Parliament during the war has lost the contact with the government, and they do not have the meetings we used to have, and the ministers are not attending the meetings of the committees, and plus, in addition, the cooperation with the government is not strong enough. And in the end, we can see that, for example, the law on the personal income tax and the law on the taxes and managing of the taxes on the side, it is blocked by the Minister of Finance. So we have to understand that, and we have to have political will regarding this to adopt this draft law, because, for example, when we're talking about managing the personal income tax, we had 14 of them, and they were registered before the full-scale war, and each of them is better than what we have so far. Then, speaking of the managing of the taxes, Mr. Bazgin is co-author of this draft law, and Mr. Makusha, and there is a transition period, and we could have administrated it, and we could have adopted it if the taxation authority and the Minister of Finance were willing to adopt it too. And as for my direction, I can say that among the achievements, the law on the administrative procedure, and also there is the law. Well, actually, I would like to make a remark here, because when the research was conducted, it is said in context of the claims. Well, no, it concerns administrative procedure, so please correct it. So the law on the administrative procedure, it's kind of adopted, it's kind of signed by the president, but the government is not ready. We made the amendments to 200 laws and bylaws. Bylaws are not always prepared for that, and here we have a big piece of work on the preparation of the bylaws by the government, and I do not know whether we can control it somehow. Of course we can ask about that, but I can see that there is a lot of work when it comes to administrative procedure, and it is regarding the reforms of the business, the honest relations between citizens and the government, without power abuse by the officials. And as for the administrative fees. So it's kind of European Commission was saying something about it. It seems like something was already said by Ukraine, but for some reason it is not on the roadmap. It is in the report of the European Commission. It is, and if you would have asked the heads of the centers of the administrative services provision, it's not there. So my daughter, when she was studying in the 8th form in France, children there understand that services should not be free. They are taught that the services cannot be free of charge, because in this case everyone is paying for this, but any kind of service should be paid by the person who is asking for this service. So all these things should be in the office of the mayor. And in Ukraine, the Minister of Justice is still persuaded that they have to be in the regional administrative centers services provision. So there is lots of work with the parliament. There is lots of work with the government ahead. We were supporting even this law, but the thing is that we have to be discussing it. So we will continue working despite the very difficult time, the martial law, and I think that we have to do our best for this roadmap to be working, and as for everything that was mentioned by the European Commission and the roadmap, for it to be matching. And now, speaking of the supervision, I can see nothing here, so it's kind of the last provision, but that is the main draft law. I don't understand that the heads of Radas do not like it, but I think that we have to adopt it, and it is in the report of the European Commission. France has adopted this system of perfects 200 years ago. So that should be the two-side movement. We have to do what the local authorities want. We have to give them more fiscal independence, economical independence, but we have to split the authorities. But when it comes to supervision, it is a very relevant question, and we have to adopt it. And then we have need different bylaws and the other things. Thank you, Ms. Larissa. Thank you. By the way, the only thing I would like to pay attention, some of the laws are not law. For example, 1061, and I think that there is no point of conducting the survey on this. So with this, I'm passing the floor to another my colleague, Dmytro Mukisha. And we have not only the general framework I will ask about a few things, not only about the general framework. I would like to ask you about the support of the local authorities of the armed forces of Ukraine. And I think that there is a package of the alternative draft laws. And also, I would like to ask your opinion on the principles on calculating the personal tax income. We do understand that there are different models, and I completely agree that what was said by Ms. Larissa Bilazir, that every registered draft law is much better than the current system which exists at the moment, but nevertheless there is a different opinion. We understand that the local authorities, they also have different approach and understanding. Mr. Dmytro, the floor is yours. Thank you. I'm very glad to see all of you. In fact, I really like what I see. I like the analytical materials in my file. Very briefly, but maybe a bit dry, but nevertheless, what we have registered and what is the status. Let me start from the beginning. 9563-1. And during the previous meeting, I was asking, why do we have this -1? Why the main law was not okay? Because of Mr. Slobodan, who wrote dozens of posts about it? Well, interesting question. And in this context, I can see that there are the draft laws, which used to be considered, by the way, during a few sessions, and finally they were adopted. And here, we do not have 9599 D, and we do not have 9560 here, which is a continuation of 9599 D. Unfortunately, the president didn't sign the document, and in my opinion, it is a very big mistake, and it doesn't help the armed forces of Ukraine and the defense sector of Ukraine at all. And that is something which we need right now and right here. And if we are talking about strategic things, in this case, and by the way, we understand that all this agenda is, so to say, absorbs some general question and some very small issues. Speaking of the personal income tax, I would have said that it's a more kind of local issue, maybe not the small one, but like more local one. Because if we try to resolve this personal income tax issue right now, in this case, that is not the. We understand that we shouldn't use a model which exists so far. In my opinion, this personal income tax should be paid. It should be divided by the place where you live and by the place where you work, and more of it has to be distributed at the place where one lives, and one. During his or her life, when the person goes to work, they are trying to provide for their needs and to resolve their own problems. And that is the reason why one works and gets salary. The part of these needs cannot be resolved by the person itself, her or himself, and therefore Hromada or the state is resolving this issue for them. It is quite logical that the state or Hromada level is responsible for, that is the service provision, and logically that the place where this person lives is where the person lives and works. Let's be honest. Mostly it works for majority, and it's logical that person will get more services at the place where he or she lives and less services where he or she works. And therefore I think that the split of the personal income tax revenue, it will be logical in this way. And by the way, I cannot see the personal income tax for the regional level if we are talking about the area of residing of the person is in these two actual places where one works and where one resides. But if we are talking about the general things, about more strategic things, so then the personal income tax revenue split, the shares and the level, it doesn't matter until the moment when, first of all, we do not split the authorities and responsibilities, and second one, in my opinion, on the basis of these, we have to adopt the new taxation code. And the third thing, administrative, territorial dispersion. And when we look on the table, which we have in this table, and the rates of their importance, we can see that, of course, in the first place, we can see the proper life conditions. So I'm opening, and the second priority for the local governance, that is the law on the adoption of the law on the resolving some separate questions of the local territorial administrative issues. So the second one, taxation and budget code. So it means that they are already not satisfied with taxation and budget, and it proves what was said before. So these global strategic things, we have to work on them right now. We have to develop these initiatives, and the initiatives, they are global, and they cannot be resolved in one session. I would say that we cannot resolve it even in a few sessions. We have to talk about them a lot and very deeply, and therefore I'm very glad that this process of the responsibilities and authorities really started. And of course, I would like this process for the territorial administrative territorial distribution started. And we have to be thinking of how it can be changed. And also, in the same way, we can be talking about the taxation code, which, in my opinion, is one of the key ones. The general things, the very local things. So in 5 minutes. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Mr. Dmitro. Thank you for the right emphasis. And considering the facts you've mentioned, I will very organically pass the microphone to Mr. Mykola. Mr. Mykola Rupchak has returned to the Minister of Development of Communities and Territories of Ukraine. Speaking of what Dmitro has said and his context, yes, indeed, the results are very different when we compare the polls face-to-face and online. If we are talking about online, then 96% of respondents have voted for the other issues in the territorial administration. I think in this case they are talking about Armadas, and even they are talking about the standard thing when we observe that the districts, the settlements are renamed, and the name of Armada remains the same. And Mykola, I do understand why Mykola is smiling. I was going to the ministry, and the head of Zvahel is calling me. He says, we are Zvahel for 2 years, and the pro-Russian guys are laughing at me because we are voting for Novograd-Volynskiy district. And I know that the ministry is working on that. And of course, we would like to understand when it will work out. And the second thing, which is fundamental in my opinion, that is statistics and mainly municipal statistics, because any state policy, if it is not based on the statistical data, in this case, it's based on the deep analytics from the roof. So do we have any kind of progress and improvements here? Thank you, Mr. Vitaly. Greetings, dear colleagues. Yes, indeed. A lot of the things mentioned by Mr. Dmitro, Ms. Larissa, and Mr. Oleksandr, they are very correct. Starting from the interesting comments on the territorial organization of the government, which is the grounds and defines the directions of the further development. We started the work on this, and also the territorial work on the development of the legislation, which will be focused on the responsibilities, and now we are identifying the members of the working group, but the support, thanks to the support of the Council of Europe, we had the presentation, and a lot of people participated from this table, and we were discussing conceptual things, how to divide what is delegated, what is transferred authorities, how they can be financed, because all of us understand that if the authority is not supported by the resources, then the authority is not efficient. So that is something we are working on now. I would like to think for renaming the territorial hromadas. At the moment, this draft law is being considered. We have more or less 30 hromadas which need to be renamed of the territorial hromada. And in Ukraine, on the current stage, we cannot have Zhdanivska Hromada or, for example, some other interesting name. Let's not be talking about constitution and the name of one oblast. I hope that one day we will come to this point as well. We had a discussion currently regarding the city, which is the town Pavlograd, that it's not the Pavlo who used to be empire, but that is the apostle. But it actually worked out, like it worked out. So renaming of Hromadas, yes, it's on our agenda. We have developed the draft law, and it is being considered, and we hope that soon it will be considered by the government and parliament. So I talked about division of the authorities, and speaking of reframing of the local administrations, I would like to inform you that the members of the parliament and the expert, we are considering the question of adoption of this draft law, and we have some certain recommendations of the European Commission regarding this draft law. at the moment we are working with them on this matter, and I think that partially these recommendations, which are quite technical, we will be able to regulate it. There were also the questions of the high policy, and that is not the field of my expertise, so I'm not going to comment on that. Local statistics, yes, indeed, local authorities cannot be developing and be forming their plans of development and strategies without data on what do they have on their territory. Then there is a question, we were discussing the limits and the borders, and well, speaking of limits and borders, that is for Reformatting because it's expensive and it's difficult. But it's very important for those who want to know what do they have and where do they have, and for them to be able to have the lands, to be accountable for the lands they have. Another thing I would like to mention that in the Ministry of the Regional Development, we have the updating of the strategy of the regional development, and we are identifying the functional types of the territories where we will have a bit different type of financing and provision provision, financing, and the other things. The draft law on approving the borders of Hromadas, and is being considered now, because so far we have the draft law on the mobile territorial Hromada. It stopped. So we have to think how we have to reframe them, how to maybe to increase their territories or decrease. Should we have more Hromadas in the difficult on the territories with difficult conditions because they have to manage the territories better, or maybe we have to enlarge them to have better administration there. In addition to that, we are discussing the question of the new methods of the capacity evaluation, both for territorial Hromadas which were organized not voluntarily, and the local authorities. Thank you very much. By the way, a few more remarks. I think that as for serving in the local administration, I think that on the basis of 1154, we can adopt it and have more norms than we used to have. And I think that some things we can improve right now. A few more remarks. I know that you are working right now on the regional strategies and there is the small event in Lviv where the representatives of the ministry are there, and the committee is representing there. But there is one important thing. Speaking of the functional types of the territories, we do understand that the law on the basics of the regional policies is not fulfilled here, not fulfilled from the side of the government. What was adopted was it improved as a territories which needs to be reconstruction. It's difficult to say that it was a professional law. Unfortunately, I guess you will have to redo what was done before you and to describe all the functional types. And another thing is that the law says that the members of the commission in this case, I think that they are mainly the members of the local parliament, so of course of the parliament, and of course we are going to support this process, and we have to correct the mistakes which were made before. Thank you, Mr. Mykola Rubchak, and I'm passing the floor to Oleksandr Slobozhan, and Executive Director of the Association of Ukrainian Cities, and I will have a couple of questions. The first one is the list of the draft laws. I saw that 53% of support of the horizontal evening, and I think that he's the only one. He was the one who named this draft law in this way, because I guess no one knows better what he meant by this. And also the principle of the calculation of the personal income tax. And I do understand that different associations have different opinion about this matter. Thank you, Mr. Vitaly. First of all, greetings to all of you who are offline with us, who are online with us. Thank you to organizers. Thank you, USAID, for the systematic support of the local authorities. So I would like to explain why, for it not to be formalized, is important, because these kind of researches gives us the opportunity to be focused on the local authorities' problems, legal way of resolving these issues, because they can be resolved in different ways. And it's really good that we have sustainability here. And it means that the previous events, the previous work, gives us the impression that in some cases we move forward in the right way or maybe in the wrong way. It's really good that the part of the laws, which were at that point not even the draft laws, but due to the offers of the local authority, they were just on the stage of the offers. I would like to thank the members of the parliament that they supported them, they registered that, and they also supported them in the parliament. It's very difficult. And now I'm going to talk about transparency and about the tools for avoiding, for working with local authorities, because Mr. Mykushin was the one who gave me this idea. So the matter was not in 10 posts, not in 20 or 30 posts. Well, I had even more of them, and we had posts and texting on the support of the local authorities, by the local authorities of the armed forces of Ukraine. Of course, we had different opinions on that inside the association. In both as local authorities, some of them, they thought that it's the responsibility of the state, and the others thought that it should be the local responsibility. And we had lots of discussions on subcommittee, on the committee meetings. But what do I mean by that? These draft laws were not registered. I mean, they were not in agenda for 8 months. And during one of the events, we've mentioned that. And here I would like to recap a bit. So I'm the author of the first petition on considering this draft law. That is what I would like to say to Mr. Dmytro. And in this way, we wanted to show how important too in the parliament, and now I'm talking to the members of the parliament, that it's the most difficult way to register the petition, the most difficult one. So I guess there is no more difficult way to register it. But what is the point? The petition in 2 days got 25,000 votes, and maybe it helped to add it to agenda. And after this, of course, that was the contribution of Mr. Bezgin, Mykushin, and Ms. Bilazir, who are present with us, who are also online with us. Many of them are online with us, and I would like to explain why. Because these draft laws were adopted. What is it different between 95-61? Because it included the block of supporting to the temporary occupied territories to the armed forces of Ukraine. But all of it has to be adopted, and they have to be taken account. And we are quite confident that no, they will start working. The next thing regarding answering the question regarding the personal income tax. Yes, indeed, we need to change the formula. Considering the war, the government has stopped the withdrawing from the local budgets, because it is impossible to withdraw funds. And I had the discussion with the Minister of Finance. I was asking him, how Mariupol and Kharkiv, how can you take the money from them when they are bombed? And Mr. Beskin has asked Mr. Rubchak a very interesting question regarding statistics, because it is the obstacle for all the system. We cannot be calculating the reverse datation objectively at the moment without the sufficient statistical base. And in the Minister of Finance, they did not finalize this work, and therefore the best approach would be to stop the reverse withdrawal and move. And in the future, we need to move to the vertical horizontal evening, and which works in the other countries, for example, in the Scandinavian countries or the European countries, where the where the budget is calculated per capita, and we are not taking the money from those who work really well, and we are not stimulating in this way to work better, and we are not giving the funds to those who do not want to work, and we are not motivating them not to work. And I would like to remind you that in 2014, the level of the dotational budgets was 98%, and it led to the situation we had the Soviet type of approach. Everyone gives what he has, and everyone gets what he needs. So this system is over, and we need to establish the font of the vertical evening, and we need to, and every Hromada which is not close to the average, they have to get some certain percentage, and it will show the real work. And it will not be working in this way that, for example, one Hromada was able to have some kind of, through the context, to get two buses for their schools, and the other Hromada didn't manage to do that because they do not have context. So I think that this system will change because there are no other ways for the development, and I think that the members of the parliament will support us. But speaking of the personal income tax, no matter what system will be adopted out of three presented, our position was mentioned, and it was articulated in the beginning of the cadency of the parliament in the taxation committee. The personal income tax has to be paid where the working facility is. So because if I made a few working places, if I brought the money here, I get more, and we should not we should not do it the other way. But no matter what system will be adopted, anyways, it will have an impact on no matter what system will be adopted, the local statistics and the formula of evening will be working. 14 draft laws and 16 draft laws, it doesn't matter how many draft laws we have. The thing is that taxation authority does not follow the requirements of the taxation code. In the middle of the year, they are renaming the structural departments. And the second thing is that taxation authorities does not follow their requirements according to the taxation code. And why they do not pay attention to the local revenues? It's not profitable because the salary of the tax official, it doesn't matter whether they will collect these local taxes or not. And you do not need to do any kind of laws. So that is the simple decree of the Cabinet of Ministers. But a few more words. Considering the fact that tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, for us as the local authority, we will have two very important days, extremely important days. I wouldn't like them to be in our support. That is a draft law 6013, and I will explain you why. For the first message for those who are watching us, there is no transfer period for the communal entities which are being established. Please pay attention. There is the transfer period for the established one. If you need to establish the communal entity, I think that our colleagues will be with us, Mr. Aliksiychuk, but I would like Mr. Beskin to pay attention to this. In this case, everything will collapse on the intermunicipal cooperation because establishing communal entity is impossible when this law will be adopted. Please pay attention to this. The transfer period is only for the existing one if they're going to reframe during the next 5 years. And we were drawing attention to the author of this law. Let's consider the example of Kryvyi Rih. They have the heat supply issues. The part of the city is heated without any problems, and the other part of the city is an issue, and there is a private heat supply provider, and there we have to do everything manually. So just pay attention. We made the sectoral reform of the medicine. We have established 15,000 non-commercial entities, and what is going to happen to them? So I have the request to the members of the parliament, a huge request. Do not allow this draft law passing this way, and on the 18th of December, we'll have just the first reading, but we can recap the midterm loans. And I would like to thank all the members of our linear committee. They were not only discussing but suggesting something. There is the Article 44 of the law as of 2014. So for you to understand that are the debts of this of Yanukovych and Azarov, that are those credit to the Russian Federation, which now won 10 billion hryvnias for Harnets to pay for those previous years. Just imagine that they were not capable to resolve this issue, and the parliament did not make the state to do that, and they made the draft law, and they said that these debts will be covered with the Harmata funds. But what is the obstacle? The debts of Harmatas are passed to the newly established Harmatas, and it means that the courts who are in charge, which are in charge on the Reformatting, and Ms. Larisa can prove it. In Vinnytska, we have this issue, for example, Vinnytska Oblast. So speaking of law of 122/45, let's not allow the Yanukovych debts to be in the local budgets now. Sorry, I just wanted to respond to your two questions and to respond to Dmitro's comment. Thank you very much. I'm going to respond as well. A few things. First of all, speaking of the, so to say, vertical horizontal evening. First of all, I think that we already have it in this way because the amount of the basic dotation is higher than the reverse dotation. It means that the state is paying from bigger Harmatas to smaller Harmatas. And in fact, these formulas should be corrected, and I totally agree that without the relevant statistic data, which will consider the migration which took place after the full-scale war, well, I think that is irrational to do all of these things. And mainly I heard from the main Harmatas, for example, in the Givnet, that there is a problem, that they are calculating with the old statistics, and they have 4.5 thousand people, and in fact they have 9,000, and in this way the services analysis is not relevant. Speaking of the reverse, I think that the parliament position was manifested during the sessions, but I will mark one thing which I really liked, and maybe Mr. Marchuk from the minister will like it. During the previous week, Mr. Serhiy Sukhomlin has mentioned it, and we were discussing there that there is one type of the territories which is not supported by the government at all, and he said that if the state position will be to develop these territories, in this case the reverse should go not to the general port but to the local policy of the development, from the house to the some sort of territory area of development. And I think that this is something we can consider. Speaking of 12,245, we've heard you, and speaking of the 6013, we had the discussion with Oleksandr. The discussion was a bit about different thing. I was articulating my position that even when we are talking about the existing corporatization of the communal entities is something that we cannot avoid. That is something we will have to do. Is it possible to implement it in the same way all around Ukraine? Well, no. And I was given the example of Kherson. Tell me, please, how till the 1st of January 2027 in Kharkivska, Sumska, and other oblasts, and I'm not talking about Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, how can we prepare inventorization and how we can prepare them for corporatization? And I've heard the says that there is a separate transfer period for these territories. No, it's not in the tax. And then I've heard the position that Association of the Cities says that the conditions should be the same for everyone. And in the end of the day, we were talking about this matter with the author of this draft law. Mr. Oleksandr didn't call him in this way. The speaker of the Parliament, we were talking just yesterday and the day before yesterday on the compromise in this matter. And of course, Mr. Oleksandr wants to adopt it, but in fact, he is ready for the compromise to adopt the transfer periods adequate for the communal entities. And that is something we are going to discuss. Let's continue and let's pass the floor to another association, to Mr. Sergei Levchuk. The Association of the Regional Hromadas. So a few things I would like to, head of the Secretariat of the Association of District and Regional Councils. So we will need to develop the regions in the context of your integration, and of course, organically. We will move to Hromadas, and if we consider these draft laws, everything there is about the basic level of self-government and what are the priorities of your association. And also, Mr. Dmytro said that after changing the approach in calculating the personal income tax revenue, we have nothing. So what do you think, does your association think about the personal income tax revenue? So please don't say that we need to the share of the personal income tax revenue to the oblast councils. Please, Mr. Serhiy, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Vitaly. As well as Mr. Oleksandr, I would like to thank you for the work done, but in the context that this document is visualizing the amount of legislative work which has to be done in Ukraine, and thanks to the linear committee, I think not without association, of course. And I think that we are not a part of all the areas of work, but I can say a few words about priorities. I think that is not the first draft law regarding the division of the authorities and responsibilities, and I think the Rayon councils is the most painful for me. It is not resolved for quite a long time, and there are lots of discussions regarding it and different positions regarding it. And our position as association, I think it's clear and understandable. And speaking of how we can implement it, just the day before yesterday, I was in one council in Vinnytska, and they say that our district council is operating only because we have one entity where the entity is growing some fish, and that helps us to cover our basic needs and to fulfill the functions we have. So the situation is very differential, and therefore the priority is finalizing this dialogue and finding the consensus, because this story took too long. Speaking of the priorities, so we have the new mechanisms on the decision making, and quite often it's not very transparent and not very understandable. Speaking of the referendums and e-petitions, we were talking a lot about these today, and of course we would like to have some clarity about these things and to make it aligned with European standards. I would like also to add a few things regarding association. We are talking a lot about association, and association have the function of the consolidation of the thoughts of the local authorities and their representation on the international stage. And therefore, it is so important, in our opinion, to have institutional support of the capacity of the associations. And therefore, we consider the provision on suspending the right to be in one association only. It can lead to disbalancing of self-government in Ukraine, and therefore I'd like to repeating that. In this case, we have to find the balance through dialogue and not to insist on these or the other position. So we are forming our opinion on the personal income tax and revenue. So if we will not find the consensus, so let's discuss the balance. Thank you, Mr. Serhiy. A few more remarks. Speaking of you said the finalizing of the dialogues regarding Rayon Council. So it seems to me that we are trying to finalize it for quite a long time, and it's not over. Some of the members of this roundtable were on Friday, and we had the launch of the working group on. There is responsibilities which the ministry undertook. And this document will be adopted in March, and we had different positions around the table, but there was also the position that the situation of the Rayon councils should be resolved. And of course, I will be advocate for 2 levels of self-government with 3 levels of territorial division. I think it will be fair regarding the people who will come to the next, will participate in the next electoral campaign. The next thing I would like to mention, I checked the drafts. Speaking of 245, I think we have to regulate it till the second hearing, because it is the responsibility of the ministry, and as far as I understand, they had to do that till the end of the year. So I think we have to promote it through the readings and not to fail this process at all. Another association we have with us, Mr. Serhiy Sharshov, expert of the platform legislation for ATCs of the All Ukrainian Association of ATCs of Ukraine. So the same questions as we asked Mr. Serhiy. I know that you have another opinion about associations and the law on the associations. So what do you think about the updates in the law on the associations? Greetings, dear colleagues. I don't want to repeat myself. I would be brief, and I would like to pay attention to those things which are in discussed by the members of our association. In this case, we are talking not about global, but more global things. Division of the responsibilities and authorities, and 4288, where we have the questions of the administrator fulfilling the sectoral legislation. And here we have the conflicts on the recommendation between the Council of Europe recommendations and what we have so far. But we didn't discuss it, and it's in the agenda. There are the laws which regulate the local self-government, which were adopted more than 20 years ago, but they were not reconsidered and they were not amended. Mainly I'm talking about the status of the work of the members of the local councils. It was adopted more than 20 years ago, and it has lots of fundamental standards from the Soviet Union, and it needs to be revised. At the same time, we were discussing the question of in the All Ukrainian Association, we were discussing the self-government, and I would like to draw attention to the fact that this law was not amended for a long time, and it also needs to be revised, also to be aligned with the European chart and the freedom of choosing the association, as it is mentioned in the concept of this law. Beside that, I would like to talk more about Zvyahin, which was raised. It is quite often raised by our association. And the perception and adoption of the law on diversification, denationalization, decommunization, desovietization. Still, we have the old names of the territorial unions, and according to the decree of the Parliament of Ukraine, Krasnograd was renamed. All of us know that, but the decree of but nevertheless, we have Krasnogradsky district, and we have the Krasnogradska territorial Gromada. So whatever the government does, this decision will not meet the requirements of the decree of the parliament. So first, we have to revise these acts which have higher level, which are of the higher level than the cabinet of ministers. The same thing should work with Vyahil, because Vyahil is not registered in the decree of the parliament. Also, we raised the question of resolving of the status of the workers of the military administrations in the settlements. For more than 2.5 years, so we still have it mentioned that they work in the military administrations. The employees, what status do they have? It's not clear enough, and of course it leads to the following problems: the retirement, the payments, and the rest of the things. So that is a very painful question, because even at the moment we have we have to revise the financing and salarying of the military administration, of the employees of this military administration. That is something we have to reconsider and right now. And also we have the forestry code, and in case if the people if the forest was damaged by the unidentified persons, the local authorities have to pay for this. So it means that if someone has done something wrong in the forest, all the financial responsibility is on the local authorities. And I'm not going to repeat that we need to increase administrative fee, but it is also a very relevant question, and this question is raised quite often. And also we were mentioning the question of 9559D. So the decisions are made by the local authorities, but these local authorities to support the armed forces of Ukraine, they are, so to say, illegal. And here we have the criminal cases and the rather cases on power abuse by the local administrations. And also we have the question of the unresolved question on inventarization of the property located on the territories of the territorial Radas. I would like to raise a question. So, considering the martial law, we have moratorium on these kind of checks, as also the checks of the land. So in this context, we have to resolve this issue, or if it is possible, we have to remove this moratorium, because inventarization is not possible in this way, or we cannot prove whether it is legally or illegally the land is used, and to make the inventarization is impossible. And beside that, we are raising the question that to the 1st of January, as far as I remember, the 1st of January 2025, all Radas have to have the complex plan of the spacious planning, and I think that we have to postpone this, because I'm not quite sure that all Radas will be able to implement it. That is briefly all from my side. Thank you, Mr. Sehi. Thank you. Now we are moving to the experts. And the first expert, Anatoly Tkachuk, who is online with us. We were talking a lot about decentralization. Maybe I will ask a bit more. You've seen the agenda and the priorities for the local self-government. And of course, we have to ask you about the coherence, European policy of coherence, regarding what we have in our dictionary and the regional policy, and we will dedicate the next meeting of the Congress will be dedicated to Ukraine. What are your thoughts? So greetings, dear colleagues. Can you hear me? Yes, we do hear you. So I made even a small presentation. If you don't mind, please show it, because yes, we can see your slides. I can't see them. Okay, I can see them now. Please, the next slide. And the next one. Dear colleagues, at the moment, I'm not inside the process, and I'm not even in this room, and therefore I will be speaking more philosophically thinking. So at the moment we have war, and the war has an impact on everything we can be talking about or should be talking about. meaning that we have two big challenges. The first big challenge is the war. The second big challenge is a movement to the European Union. The third one, we have the feeling the people in the territories feel what is happening, and that is something I would like to draw attention to. What should we be doing? Is it only me who cannot see? We can see slides. We do not know whether you can see the slides, but we can see that. I can see nothing. So we have the slides, functional types of territories, and we need to change them. Well, yes. So we were saying that we have the law. We have the law on the original policies where we have identified some certain types, functional types of territories. The territory of recovery, where we have and also the territory of the sustainable development. And there are no these kind of territories in the world. And at the same time, the other important territories which we have and which the European Union has and which are in the Article 174, according to the agreement with the European Union, and therefore the strategy which was updated, it cannot even develop these ideas in the way they should have been developed. And therefore we need to make the amends briefly to the laws on the grounds of the state local territories and to work on the functional territory. That is going to be one of the answers to the question whether we are able to join the financing from the European Fund of Cohesion. Because Article 174 of the agreement with the European Union speaks about the cohesion and it is also evaluating the capacity of different regions, the support for the weaker ones, and concentration on identifying these competitive advantages of the weaker territories in order for them to move from the simple dotations to the development. But of course, it's not the end. Of course, we have planning after this. What does planning in Ukraine and internationally wise mean? What do we mean strategy? Where do we do that spatial plan and when we're doing that? That is budget. And they are interrelated. Unfortunately, all of these three components are not aligned, and we have to align them somehow. So later we'll show you the suggestions, because at the moment you can see this slide. So tell me, please, what cities and in which countries these so on the left you can see Kharkiv, and on the right you can see Belgorod. Meaning that at the moment we have an interesting situation. We are talking about decommunization, decolonization, and most of the territories which are temporarily occupied and most of the cities which are destroyed, they have symbols built on the decree of the Russian Duma parliament, which which sets the requirements for the local symbolics. But for example, we have Kyivska Oblast and Luberg city, which have their own symbols developed on the grounds of the Russian school. So I think that it's the wrong thing, and we have to revise these requirements as well. Another thing, when I'm telling what do we have to consider when we're preparing the laws, we have to understand how people perceive the situation. We are using the surveys, and on this slide you can see the results of the survey conducted by the Council of Europe. What can we see here? We can see what is quite often mentioned by Mr. Yuri. That is some sort of feudalization of some specific territories where the local self-government are they have power abuse, and the citizens are saying that there should be more supervision over this. On the second slide, there is a question whether Hromada can have an impact on the local on the local authorities. The majority answered no. And when we consider it the territories, where do these people have this feeling? We have two policies. The first policy is big cities, and the small one is small villages. So we can see the situation when on big territories and in big cities, people in some certain micro districts or in the multi-story buildings, they feel abandoned because they feel that they have no impact on the local self-governments. And also the people in the remote territories, in the remote settlements, in big Hromadas, they have no impact on their on the self-government. So that is also the reason to make the amendments to the legislation. How to do that, we will discuss it later. So the next slide, please. If you look at this scheme, so you can see the territories and territorial Hromadas. What territorial Hromadas should be developing? That is just a catastrophe. That is strategy. That is spatial development plan, general plan. So that is a complex recovery plan, the plan of recovery. That is integrated development plan. Well, okay. But why? Why so many documents? So many documents which duplicate each other, or they are not matching the other document. That is something we need to change. It's easy and really needed. So on the next slide, we can see how it can be done now. The draft law is already prepared to make these changes, and that is something that we should be doing fast, and we can do that during the next session of the Ukrainian Parliament. In the process of the discussion, I have made some remarks here, what I would like to draw attention to. Mr. Vitaly was talking about the schemes of the spacious planning, which all Hromadas have to have after the 1st of January 2025. So coming back to the picture where different territories belong to different macro regions, in open access sources, we can find that Kherson got 24 million hryvnias for the development of this plan. In Kherson, where less than one third of population is left, and these cities constantly shelled. So there is a question whether it's the right time to do that. So we have to understand that for these problematic territories, which are now on the verge, on the border with the Russian Federation and the front line, things should be working in the other way. So when we're talking about the administration of the local revenue of the personal income tax, we made the modeling, and the part of the territorial Hromadas will not be able to establish the new authority, and the expenditures of these authorities will be higher than the potential revenue. Can we do it simpler? Yes, we can, because we are talking about digitalization. And to make digitalization, we need two things. The first thing is to remove all the subsidies on the taxation of the property, personal property. We have to make the personal property tax lower, and we have to have the rule that everyone can calculate their own tax by calculating square meters they have according to the scale we will identify. And then the bank, so for example, there is a Aval Bank, which has this kind of service where you can pay the local tax, and you can go to any territorial Hromada, and if you have real estate property, if you have property there, you will see how much do you have to pay, and then you can pay for it. So you do not need to establish your own structures and to spend lots of money, but the impact will be minimum. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to finalize. One more remark. Thank you. The law on the strategic and ecological evaluation. At the moment, Hromadas are developing the strategies of the development of Hromadas. Just look at the strategy of the ecological evaluation. And you have to make the CU strategy the plan of implementation and plan of the project, and the impact on the ecology will be just in the project, and the expenditures will be on each stage. So that is something we have to change as well. So we are ready to partake this process and to show the drafts on how it can be done. Thank you very much, Mr. Anatoly. Thank you for very interesting and information. I think that the committee will have the request to pay attention to we will plan the strategic session on the documentation, because there is chaos in documentation which occurred recently. I don't think that it should exist in this way. That is the waste of time and money, public money, the money of the taxpayers, which we have at the moment. And thank you very much for the advertisement integration of Avalbank. Dear colleagues, we are out of time, so I will ask the following speakers to have less than 6 minutes. 6 minutes is not 3, so please, Igor Kolyushko, expert in constitutional and administrative law, chairman of the board of the Center for Political and Legal Reform. So what are your thoughts on what you've seen on the analytical information provided by HOVERLA project? Thank you, Mr. Yugi. Thank you, the organizers, for this meeting, for this discussion. It's so nice that finally we have developed a format where all of us can be in one room, can hear each other, and to talk to each other. So considering the timing, I will be very brief, a few theses, and I will be answering your questions. So it seems to us that the current legislation the priority at the moment is 4298, and in summer we met with executive power and the government, with the secretariat, and also with the new deputy minister. And I think that, speaking of the compromise on these 13 articles regarding the authorities, I think that there is some consensus there. But we have to meet together, and in the framework of the working group, it could have been easier to resolve it and to work on this article. The key idea which should be implemented there is that we have to identify, have them clarity with authorities. What are the authorities which belong to the local authorities, and according to the current constitution, are performed by the local administrations? And what are authorities, what powers are the powers of the central authorities, and why? And for some reason, they are transferred to the local authorities by decreasing the number of the administrations. So they are different, and first of them, they have to be in the body of the law, and they have to be identified as authorities, and that the decisions are made by the local authorities, and the implementation has to be the responsibility of the local authorities. And the next one has to be just as a transfer provisions, because in the perspective we have to have the prefectural type authorities, and these powers cannot belong to the prefecture type of authorities. So that is something we are ready to work on. That is very important. And once again, we are very interested, and we suggest to adopt the law on the administrative fee, 4380, and of course we suggest to consider the law on the application. Speaking of the law on association, the amendments to this law are also needed, and in this case we can be looking for the compromises for a long time. And if we are talking about the oblast councils and the rayon council, I do not see any problem. of multi-participation in an association. In this case, let's not create the problem, and I totally agree with this. If, for example, in Harnets, there is this problem on the basic level, and it is acute, in this case, we have to resolve this problem, because we just not talking about it, it's not the right way. And of course, we need to move the law on OVSN. We were discussing with Mr. Dmitro this law, and I think that there is lots of constructive ideas from both sides on this law, but nevertheless, it's not moving forward for some reason. That is speaking of the current matters, tactical level, but also we have the second block of problems we have to be talking about, and I would call them the perspectives or the strategy of the development of the local self-government. Some say that we have to rewrite the concept of the reform of the local self-government. Some of the people are against this reform, and I think that we have to be looking for some compromise. And if it is so difficult to agree with the full rewriting, in this case, we can be talking about amendments to this law, to expanding it. And of course, it is not fulfilled fully, and therefore, speaking when we are talking about canceling or finishing this reform, it's not correct. But the fact that this reform does not answer all the questions we have on our agenda, I think that is a fact. And I think that that is something we have to work on. And therefore, we are ready to participate in this process, and we are going to prepare our offers in January. And also, it is important to combine these processes with your integration process. It shouldn't be two processes. One process where we have some certain concept, and the second process we are integrating to the European Union. It seems like we are finally on the stage when we got the response of the European Commission's to all our screenings. We have the draft of roadmaps and the rest of the things, and now we have to combine it, and on the basis of this, we have to make one document, and that can be the updated concept, which will show what are we doing and how. And of course, in this context, so first of all, we would like to suggest to consider the law on the administrative territorial division on the basis of the current constitution. But we think that Hromada can be recognized administrative territorial unit in the framework of the current constitution. The problem of the powers and the revenues should be according to the powers and not on the contrary. And of course, the strategic question is still in place, 5512 on the local referendum, and we should not forget it. So in this complex of questions, we are going to work on these complex of questions, and I hope that we will get the further support of you, lead. And what we have done so far, we will be presenting it on the 19th of December in 2 days here during the press conference. And we will have 3 blocks of questions dedicated to the updated legislation on the local self-government on the grounds of Hromada legal entity, and then analysis of the territorial division according to the results of 2022. We have analyzed 14 oblasts this year, and the third one is a financial component. All these aspects which are related to the problems which we were discussing. So please welcome to participate in this presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ihert. From my side, I will have a few remarks as well. So I do know that from the side of the Secretary of the Cabinet of Ministers, there is a constructive dialogue on these powers, and I think that we can find some solution there. Yes, indeed, there are some things which are duplicating, and I think that is a matter of the compromise. Speaking of the concept, no one is actually saying, both from the European side and from Ukrainian side, that we need to have amends and to about update, because you said it really right that there are some certain things which are not meeting, for example, the post-war recovery and the difficult systems in different regions of Ukraine. And speaking of the complex law on the territorial administration division, as far as I understand, you want to expand or to substitute another law on the administrative division. All of us know why Hromada is not in that law. And if someone will be able to provide 100% justification that it's going to meet the provisions of the Constitution, in this case, we will advocate for this word. Let's meet separately regarding this and let's discuss it. So I'm passing the floor to Mr. Yuri Hanushak, Director of the NGO Institute for Territorial Development. A few moments, I'm going to ask you about the distribution of powers, and that is a key aspect. So please, it's probably the thing which is not in these top priorities, maybe because it's not registered as a draft law, but nevertheless some initiatives which are here, they are not registered as a draft law, and it's quite weird for me because there is not only our integrational responsibilities, and that is something that we should have done a long time ago. Mr. Yuri Hanushak, the floor is yours. First of all, I would like to thank you for gathering us here. And yes, I think that it should be the general practice. And not only the people who are called stakeholders have to meet, but also those people who know how to write and who were on the initial stage of this reform. We need to engage them. So now a few other things which are not that pleasant. Looking at this table, we can see that we have neo-federalism, and it's getting stronger because the main document which we should have adopted yesterday, 4298, is not one of the priorities, and it's quite clear. The local self-government doesn't need. Well, there is a table on the survey, and as far as I understand, so there was no survey on this law. But if I consider the online survey, it's 18%. Yeah, I know what I'm talking about. There is a pressure from the European Union, and our obligations give me the hope that it's going to be adopted, because the office of the president doesn't need it, because in this case, the heads of the military administrations are not substituted to the president. They do not need, because law enforcement is corrupted. The cabinet of ministers does not need it because that is extra work. The Ministry of Regions is weak to support it, and also Hanushak maybe, and maybe some other people, separate individuals, they think that we need to get out of this neo-federalism. And the second thing is vertical evening is the vivid example of federalism, because vertical evening concerns only the personal income. And if we are going to talk about it, well, I don't mind to shift to the system of vertical evening which exists in France, for example, because evening on the local taxes. Speaking of the personal income tax, that is a state budget for the social services provision, and it can be only horizontal evening, and we cannot consider reverse as a separate source. So let's do this, let's do that from reverse. So that is simple math. And in the framework of the European position of the cohesion, it works. The more dotation we have, the more reverse. So, and Kyiv should be included in this, because that is because I cannot see that is a single place where I wouldn't have local self-government, no government, so a big hole. And once again, and I'm the only one who is talking about it, and the rest is silent about it. Therefore, let's be working on these matters, and let's make a separate discussion on that, because we are fooled by the words like let's encourage those who are rich for the richer to become more rich. And in this case, we are talking about the state taxation, and the only conclusion we can have, if we want to have the policy of the personal income tax, we shouldn't have pregnant laws. So there should be only the one type of personal payment, only when the one resides. And then right on the entrance of the evening, we have the difference maximum 2 times, because there are no absolutely rich people who reside in some certain place and absolutely poor. There are no. So the moment they are talking about billion spent for the school, by the way, not the construction from the scratch, but the reconstruction, 1 billion hryvnias. But during the war, why? Because all these talks about, well, maybe on the place of the location, who are we fooling? Corruptional system should be destroyed. Now speaking of their powers. 40 seconds more. We have the concept which is developed, which had to be integrated in the concept of the reform of the local governance and territorial division. And it's going to be the main thing. Why? Because why do we don't have laws? Because there cannot be laws, because there are 3 basic budget code, taxation code, local self-government, and 100 laws which are sectoral ones. For them to be written, for the sectoral laws to be written, we need to conceptually integrate the principles of the division of the powers. The only place where we can integrate it is the concept of the local self-government and territorial powers, where we can get rid of what we have at the moment and to add these things and add one word, which is called the concentration of the power. And 4298, and after it will be adopted, it will be relevant. Thank you. That in the end you have criticized all of the government, all the local governments, all associations, and actually everyone. Thank you for the fact that we have you. I think that sometimes if we didn't have you, nothing would have happened, considering the fact that we have neo-feudalism. Just a few more things. First of all, speaking of the capital, by the way, that is a question to the international partners who, for some reason, think that capital of Ukraine has to be controlled by some other legal legislation, and not as it is done in Europe. And there should be some certain political reasonable justification, and they are not talking that we do not have some certain self-government. And speaking of the personal income tax, because I'm more neutral in this case, I do not agree that when we are talking about the personal income tax, the funds have to be allocated at the places where the funds are allocated at the place where one works. So I think the tricks are happening now. When you, for example, register the entity, which is 2,000 kilometers, and Hromada gets nothing. But if you have engaged investor entered this territory, built the entity, give the working places. In this case, that is about the active work of the local head of the Hromada. And why am I for these kind of balanced decisions? Because we understand if that is a big entity, then through logistics, and they are engaging the people from the neighborhood Hromadas, and therefore I wouldn't say that there are some kind of manipulations or something like that. So let's move forward, and let's move to Ms. Olena Boyko. Not more than 6 minutes, please. And I would like to ask you, I thought, of course, Mr. Yuri would like to hear something pleasant, but, well, I don't know. Among the positive things that were voted for and became the law, that is update on the law on the elderlies, which the local authorities were asking for, and it was approved in the version which the local authorities wanted. Maybe you can talk about the framework of during the next quarter. So it's very hard to make some forecasts, please. Speaking of the stars, the first announcement, in a few hours we will have the presentation of the new research regarding the powers of the elderly, and I would like to thank the committee for the full support of the elderly institution. It is sustainable, and I think that in a few hours we are going to talk about the continuation of the reform of the elderly institution, and it's going to be very interesting. Please join our dialogue. Speaking of the pleasant things, of course, it is a pleasure for us that for the fifth time we are meeting in this circle, in bigger, smaller. We have longer discussions on the agenda, on the legislation before the beginning of the session. I do not know if there is any other committee so consistent and so taking into account the opinion of the local authorities. And I do not know whether there are so deep analysis on the agenda of the reform and whether it is fulfilled and what is positive and negative about it. So positively, that is a compliment to all of us who are in this room today. And speaking of the materials we received, I would like to draw your attention to the following thing. Among the draft laws which are in agenda for the fifth time, we have 4 of them which are Euro-integrational laws, and 3 of them are already adopted, and that is something we were mentioning. But 4298, I think that we need to underline that it's Euro-integrational law, and it is very important for both for local self-government. Then I think what we haven't done so far. When we were discussing the legislative initiatives, we are constantly talking not only about the draft laws, but also the concept regarding what do we need to initiate in the draft law. And we have the same list all the time that are the amendments to the constitution, and we understand that the war isn't going, but nevertheless we have to prepare the suggestions, and beside that there is intercommittee working group, and its obligation was to implement these, to develop these draft law. And Mr. Kornienko has initiated it, and from our Euro committee, I think 3 or 4 people were delegated to this working group. But the war has started, and inter-committee working group on the development of the suggestions on the amendments on the constitution to according to the provisions on decentralization. But due to the beginning of the full-scale war, this inter-committee group did not start its work. Speaking of the rest of the powers division, we were mentioning that for quite a few times, and I would like to emphasize that in the concept of the territorial power distribution, among the 4 tasks we have, this task is the most abundant, and we are talking about it carefully, and the Council of Europe in their report is mentioning that very carefully. And the rest of the initiatives are also relevant, and they deserve to be shown in the draft laws. And also, particularly, I would like to draw your attention to what everyone was mentioning today. That is the budget code of Ukraine. But here I would like to underline that the amendments to the budget code when during the process they lead to the collapse, and that is not in the best interest of the local authorities. So another thing I would like to mention is that great work, legislative great work, and it has to be continued in the part of the implementation. And if we have the new ministry, and I have a big request to this ministry, please pay attention to the fact that in the conclusions there are some certain timelines, and these timelines have to be fulfilled. So today we were talking about the Territorial Administrative Division, and we were talking about the law on the grounds, but nevertheless we do not have the law on the amendments to the other laws. And Ukraine has more than 100 draft laws, and we know that there is a draft law, and we have some certain suggestions and comments regarding it, and we hope that the Ukrainian legislation will be updated according to the concept of the adopted law on the grounds of of the Territorial Administration Division. And therefore, I would like to wish all our members of the Parliament good luck in the implementation of all they wish to implement peace to all of us. And thank you very much for a philosophical meeting. Thank you, Ms. Olena. Thank you for the warm words. You know how to make the situation better after Mr. Yuri, to have less tension in the air. And once again, I would like to thank all the participants. Thank you, USAID HOVERLA. Thank you, DESPRO. And I would like to pass the floor to Ms. Oksana Harnets. First of all, I would like to continue what was said by Ms. Olena, and really I would like to thank. I do not know why, whether it's because we are in the other hall, or maybe it's because we have the other people finally of us here, so to say, face to face. But nevertheless, I would like to say that today we have very interesting, very intensive day, and very motivating meeting and roundtable. And from my point of view, the fact everything that was mentioned today, it will be taken account in our next research and next survey, because we will organize forum in the end of January, and then we will have the survey before this forum, and we will identify the current priorities. And therefore, I would like to thank all of you for being with us, for discussing everything in details. Everything will be taken account and everything will be in our survey. And I hope that all of us will continue this discussion during our forum, when we will have fresh results of sociological surveys. So thank you once again. See you the next time. And I would like